Hey, I'm Austin, and today I've gathered the most disturbing chimpanzee attacks on owners ever recorded. From a Nebraska truck stop where a driver's trusted companion left him unrecognizable inside a locked cab, to a Miami apartment where an influencer's live broadcast ended with her bleeding out on camera. But first, we start in rural Pennsylvania, where an old clockmaker was beaten and partially eaten by the chimp he raised for 11 years. It was September 16, 2014. Damp air still hung over rural Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, after hours of light rain, and water dripped steadily from rusted gutters behind a row of nearly closed storefronts along Route 772. Inside one detached repair workshop, uneven metallic chimes repeatedly echoed through the building late into the evening, loud enough to carry into the empty alley behind it. Arthur Vellon was 72 and had spent most of his life repairing watches and restoring antique clocks. After his wife died in 2008, he became increasingly isolated and spent most evenings working alone behind the old storefront. I think that isolation mattered more than people realized, because the workshop slowly became his entire world. Several years before the incident, Arthur acquired an adult male chimpanzee named Barnaby through a licensed exotic animal transfer broker that specialized in relocating animals from closed roadside facilities in Ohio. Arthur believed the animal responded well to calm environments and predictable routines. He built an outdoor enclosure behind the workshop, but allowed Barnaby inside while he worked on clocks. People around him had concerns long before the attack. A delivery driver later told investigators he stopped entering the building after seeing Barnaby slam tools across a counter during a loud repair session. Veterinary notes also documented agitation around unfamiliar people and sudden metallic sounds. County officials warned Arthur about keeping the chimp unsecured near customers and contractors, but he believed the animal trusted him completely. And honestly, I think Arthur made the same mistake a lot of longtime exotic animal owners make. Years of routine started feeling more convincing to him than the warning sitting right in front of him. Adult chimpanzees are extremely strong primates, capable of pulling several times the strength of an average person. As males age, territorial behavior often becomes unpredictable, especially inside familiar indoor spaces. People stop reacting to warning signs because nothing bad happened the previous 100 times. Investigators later determined Arthur had been repairing a large grandfather clock that evening. The damaged chime assembly produced repeated metallic bursts while he tested the mechanism. Evidence suggested Barnaby became agitated shortly afterward. No witnesses saw the attack directly. Investigators reconstructed events from blood patterns, overturned furniture, broken tools, and Arthur's injuries. Authorities believed Arthur may initially have tried calming Barnaby the same way he had during earlier aggressive episodes. At some point, however, the encounter became violent fast. Arthur suffered severe injuries to both hands and forearms, consistent with defensive wounds. Blood staining across multiple sections of the workshop suggested he moved throughout the room while trying to protect himself. Investigators found broken watches crushed into the floor beside overturned drawers and scattered repair tools. The attack appeared chaotic rather than continuous. Damage inside the building suggested bursts of violence separated by brief movement around the workshop. A blood trail later extended several feet toward the rear exit before ending near an overturned stool. Investigators believed Arthur may have tried reaching the door after suffering the first major injuries. The part that really gets me is how close he probably came to escaping before collapsing inside the same building where he had spent most of his life working. Arthur missed a cardiology appointment the following morning. Shortly after 8 a.m., his niece, Corinne Vellon, drove to the property after repeated calls went unanswered. She later told investigators she noticed the workshop door open and saw movement inside before realizing Barnaby was loose. Corinne returned to her vehicle and called 911 without approaching the building. Dispatch records showed deputies arrived about 14 minutes later. Officers secured the property and waited for animal control personnel carrying tranquilizers before entering. Barnaby was sedated inside the workshop. Arthur was pronounced dead at the scene. The Lancaster County coroner later concluded Arthur died from traumatic injuries. Public details remained limited, which is standard in fatal animal mauling investigations involving extensive injuries. The incident received modest regional media coverage at the time, mostly focused on private exotic animal ownership laws. In the years afterward, several restored clocks from Arthur's collection were donated to a historical organization in Strasbourg. The grandfather clock involved in the incident was eventually discarded after investigators no longer needed it as evidence anymore. Arthur's tragedy was sparked by the sharp ring of a clock, but for Salvador Conti, it was the heavy silence of a snowed-in truck stop. He thought his cross-country hauls were safer with a companion, until a freezing sleeper cab became a deadly cage. It was February 2nd, 2018. Wet snow blew across a crowded truck stop outside North Platte, Nebraska, while diesel engines rattled beneath rows of parked trailers along Interstate 80. Ice farther west had slowed freight traffic, leaving drivers stranded overnight in slush-covered parking lanes near the diner. Salvador Conti, known to most drivers as Big Sal, had spent nearly 30 years hauling refrigerated freight through Illinois, Colorado, and Wyoming. At 51, he had the kind of reputation dispatchers trusted during winter storms. Based on what I've gathered, Salvador was quiet and deeply attached to a chimpanzee named Jojo that occasionally traveled with him during shorter regional routes. Records later showed Sal acquired Jojo through a private exotic animal broker after the chimp had spent time at a roadside attraction in Missouri. But unlike some exaggerated stories that later circulated online, Jojo did not permanently live inside the semi-truck full-time. Investigators determined Sal normally kept the chimp at a rented rural property outside North Platte and only brought him along during select overnight runs. Sal treated the animal more like a companion than something dangerous. He fed Jojo at a few remote truck stops where other drivers already recognized the chimp from Sal's occasional overnight routes, let the chimp sit in the passenger seat during quiet highway stretches, and often told other drivers the animal helped with loneliness during long weeks on the road. From what I see, Jojo had slowly replaced most of Sal's personal relationships, but people around the trucking circuit had concerns. Drivers later admitted Jojo had become harder to predict as he got older and stronger. At around 6 years old, he was not fully mature yet, but already powerful enough to seriously injure someone. One mechanic later claimed the chimp once slammed the windshield hard enough to crack part of the dashboard during an outburst outside the truck. Experts later explained that captive chimps raised around humans can become highly reactive inside noisy, confined environments. And after spending most of the day trapped inside the sleeper cab because of freezing rain, witnesses said Jojo seemed especially restless that night, pacing constantly and banging inside the truck whenever people walked nearby. Around 1:15 a.m., a waitress leaving the diner slipped near the passenger side and dropped a metal serving tray onto the icy pavement. The crash rang across the quiet lot. Almost immediately, nearby drivers heard violent movement inside the truck, followed by shouting and heavy impacts against the cab walls. Investigators believed Sal climbed back inside moments later, probably trying to calm Jojo after the noise startled him. Nobody outside could fully see into the sleeper compartment once the struggle began. Witnesses later described hearing screaming, loud thuds, and frantic vocalizations from inside the cab. Two truckers approached the passenger door, but backed away after seeing Jojo lunging aggressively near the opening. Authorities later stated the exact sequence inside the cab could not be fully reconstructed. Blood evidence and damage patterns showed a violent struggle occurred within the narrow sleeper compartment. Sal suffered catastrophic injuries to his arms, shoulders, face, and upper chest, while apparently trying to shield himself inside the confined space. Investigators also found blood along the steering wheel and driver's side door, suggesting he briefly attempted escaping before collapsing back inside. The cab effectively became a sealed trap with nowhere to retreat. The truck stop manager called 911 at approximately 1:19 a.m. Nebraska State Patrol units arrived about 11 minutes later, despite worsening road conditions. Officers secured the lot, but initially avoided entering because Jojo remained highly agitated inside the truck. According to information I gathered, responding officers briefly considered using lethal force almost immediately because the confined sleeper compartment made tranquilizers extremely risky and unpredictable. Witnesses later said Jojo continued lunging violently inside the cab whenever anyone approached the doors. After the chimp briefly moved toward the rear sleeper area, officers and animal control responders managed to open part of the driver's side door long enough for paramedics to pull Sal from the cab. Jojo was fatally shot shortly afterward when authorities determined the animal could not be safely contained inside the truck. While Sal's death was the result of a cramped cabin on a lonely highway, Chloe Renza's nightmare unfolded under the blinding lights of Miami. She chased fame with her primate co-star, ignoring the stress of a noisy filming schedule until it was too late. It was June 3rd, 2017. Heavy humidity sat over downtown Miami while traffic crawled beneath the apartment towers near Biscayne Boulevard. Inside one rented high-rise unit, ring lights and portable speakers remained running late into the evening, while several young content creators prepared another live stream. 22-year-old Chloe Renza had spent the last 2 years trying to grow an online audience through live streams and lifestyle content. Friends later said she became obsessed with engagement numbers after videos featuring exotic animals started performing far better than her normal posts. And honestly, social media rewards whatever gets the strongest reaction, even when the situation clearly stops being safe. Through online contacts, Chloe eventually connected with an underground network that supplied exotic animals for short-term social media shoots. Investigators later found many of the deals were arranged through encrypted apps and cash payments rather than legitimate exhibitor contracts. A chimpanzee named Mochi was brought into the apartment through that network. Authorities later determined Mochi was an adolescent chimp nearing maturity, estimated to be around 8 years old. At first, roommates described him as manageable around familiar people, but over time, the chimp became larger, stronger, and increasingly restless during long filming sessions involving bright lights, loud music, and crowded rooms. Former roommates later told investigators the chimp reacted badly to constant activity inside the apartment. Some described pacing, screaming, furniture shaking, and aggressive grabbing whenever filming stretched late into the night. One roommate reportedly warned Chloe that the animal no longer behaved predictably around strangers. Chloe still continued featuring Mochi because those videos consistently generated far higher engagement than anything else on her channel. Chimpanzees possess extraordinary upper body strength and complex territorial behavior that becomes more unstable as they approach adulthood. Experts later explained that adolescent chimps raised around humans often become difficult to control once hormonal and dominance behaviors intensify. Inside noisy indoor environments, agitation can escalate very quickly, especially when the animal is surrounded by unfamiliar movement and overstimulation. On the evening of June 3rd, Chloe started a live stream inside the apartment living room, while several roommates and freelance content helpers moved around the setup. Ring lights heated the room, while portable speakers blasted music near the filming area. Witnesses later stated Mochi appeared unsettled early in the stream. The chimp paced repeatedly near the lighting equipment, vocalized loudly, and resisted attempts to move away from the cameras. Investigators later said portions of the live stream became unstable once the disturbance began. At some point during filming, Mochi suddenly lunged toward Chloe from only a few feet away. Furniture near the filming area was overturned almost immediately. Evidence later showed Chloe suffered catastrophic injuries to the face, hands, and upper body while trying to shield herself. One witness later described hearing screaming, followed by repeated crashing sounds against the walls and counters. And honestly, I think that detail says everything about how quickly the apartment turned into complete chaos. The attack continued in bursts as people either locked themselves inside bathrooms or fled into the hallway. Investigators later found blood smears across the living room floor, suggesting Chloe tried moving away while severely injured. The apartment was small, but nobody inside felt capable of stopping an agitated chimp once it lost control. One roommate called 911 from inside a locked bathroom. Miami police officers arrived about 9 minutes later. According to later reports, several people inside managed to isolate Mochi inside a rear bedroom during a brief pause in the attack, allowing paramedics to reach Chloe and remove her from the apartment. She was transported to Jackson Memorial Hospital in critical condition and died 2 days later. Investigators later determined the chimp had been circulated through an unregulated animal content network operating outside normal exhibitor oversight. The case triggered inspections tied to exotic animal social media rentals across southern Florida after portions of the live stream briefly circulated online before removal. Chloe sought the spotlight with a young primate, but Sarah Keene sought redemption by rescuing a lab chimp the world had discarded. She hoped a quiet home would heal the animal, only to find that years of laboratory trauma had left it with a hair trigger for violence. It was November 9th, 2015. Cold rain had moved through the outskirts of Ashland, Oregon overnight, leaving narrow rural roads slick with mud and pine needles. Most traffic through Jackson County that afternoon came from delivery trucks near the forested foothills. Behind a property, wet cedar fencing surrounded an animal enclosure connected to part of a kitchen. Sarah Keene was 46 and had spent nearly 20 years working as a laboratory technician at a private biomedical contractor outside Portland. Former co-workers described her as quiet, careful, and patient during observation sessions involving primates. She handled feeding schedules, sedation prep, overtime. She became attached to older chimpanzees kept inside research environments. And I believe working around those animals daily really blurred the line between professional care and Sarah's emotional attachment. After the facility downsized in 2013, Sarah moved south using retirement savings and part of a legal settlement. Friends said she later became involved with a loosely monitored primate rescue nonprofit that specialized in placing retired research animals with private caretakers and rural sanctuaries. One aging male chimp especially stayed in her mind because workers rarely used a real name for him, only a tracking number. By 2015, the chimp had been transferred through several rescue properties before the nonprofit helped arrange placement on a rural property where Sarah acted as the animal's primary day-to-day caretaker, alongside periodic support from other volunteers. For me, Sarah genuinely believed she was saving him, and she has good intentions. But maybe it's a bit too much that she forgot to see some red flags. Adult male chimpanzees possess far greater upper body strength than most humans, and former handlers later explained that older captive chimps could become dangerously unpredictable during feeding or close physical contact. Investigators later found several warnings had already existed. Former handlers told Sarah the chimp had shown aggression during medical procedures years earlier, while one rescue volunteer warned the animal had become increasingly possessive around Sarah, especially during feeding and indoor interaction. On the afternoon of November 9th, evidence suggested Sarah allowed the chimp into the kitchen while preparing fruit and medication supplements. Investigators later documented a bandage covering 2 fingers on her left hand from a recent cut. Former handlers believed the scent of blood or feeding frustration may have contributed to the attack. Investigators confirmed the violence began near the side entrance connecting the enclosure to the kitchen. The struggle appeared sudden and violent. Blood patterns and overturned furniture suggested Sarah was knocked sideways into the kitchen island before collapsing against lower cabinets. One bite removed large portions of tissue from several fingers almost immediately. Fractured cabinet wood and impact marks showed repeated pulling and thrashing. Broken dishes scattered across the floor caused cuts along her knees and forearms as she tried moving away. At some point, Sarah attempted shielding her head while backing deeper into the kitchen. Medical investigators documented crushing injuries across both forearms, consistent with defensive positioning. Repeated bites around the wrists and hands exposed bone in several areas. Long smears of blood stretched from the kitchen entrance toward a hallway wall, suggesting she remained conscious and mobile for part of the attack. That detail stayed with me because it meant she was trying to survive inside her own home. The chimp continued pursuing her through the kitchen instead of retreating outside. Investigators later found scalp tissue and hair near the refrigerator alongside gouging damage in the drywall. Deputies reported overturned chairs and scrape marks across tile. An animal feed delivery driver arrived around 2:09 p.m. After hearing yelling inside and seeing blood smeared across the rear glass door, he retreated to his truck and called 911. Deputies arrived roughly 11 minutes later, though medics initially stayed outside because the chimp was still loose inside the residence. Sarah was removed alive but died during surgery at a Medford hospital. The coroner documented catastrophic blood loss, crush injuries to the arms and skull, fractured fingers, and severe bite trauma consistent with a large primate attack. The chimp was later euthanized after containment, but the case became another example of how familiarity with captive primates can slowly erase boundaries that trained facilities spend years enforcing. Sarah approached her rescue with clinical care, but Silas Morrow treated his chimpanzee like a roommate in a deteriorating cabin. He lived in a world of horror fiction, yet the reality of a winter storm would write his most gruesome ending. It was January 21st, 2016. Wet snow and freezing rain moved through the wooded outskirts outside Forks, Washington, where narrow roads had already turned slick by nightfall. Fallen branches blocked driveways, and power outages left large sections of the rural area dark and quiet. Behind one cabin near the tree line, a porch light kept flickering through the storm. Silas Morrow was 58 and had once written low-print horror paperbacks sold through small shops across the Pacific Northwest during the 1990s. He lived alone on a deteriorating property outside town. County records later showed complaints involving garbage buildup and unsafe animal containment. Investigators later learned Morrow had acquired an adult male chimpanzee named Kong through a private exotic animal broker after a traveling animal exhibit shut down years earlier. Friends said he treated the chimp more like a roommate than an animal. Kong reportedly watched television beside him and spent time inside the cabin. The more normal the arrangement felt to Morrow, the less dangerous it seemed. Behind the cabin sat a muddy enclosure surrounded by fencing and sagging tarps weighed down with cinder blocks. Adult male chimpanzees can weigh over 150 pounds and possess several times the pulling strength of an average man. In captivity, attacks often happen during stress or territorial behavior. Unlike large predators, chimpanzees do not rely on one killing bite. They grab, pull, stomp, and continue attacking long after a victim stops fighting. I think that's why chimp attacks feel especially disturbing to people. There's nothing quick or clean about them once they start. Deputies later found evidence that Kong had become increasingly difficult to control during the weeks before the attack. Sections of fencing showed bends and broken fasteners. One neighbor reported hearing repeated banging from the enclosure. Another said she saw Kong slam both hands against the fence whenever snowmobiles passed nearby. Morrow reportedly brushed off concerns and claimed the animal was only restless because of the storms. That kind of reasoning happens a lot in these cases. People slowly add a PT to dangerous behavior until it just feels normal to them. Around 10:30 p.m., the power failed again across the area. Investigators believed Morrow went outside carrying a flashlight and a broom handle, likely trying to move Kong from the porch back into the enclosure. And honestly, I still find it hard to understand how people keep making the same choices around chimps, even after so many public attacks. I think familiarity slowly tricks people into treating dangerous behavior like part of a normal routine, right up until the moment that routine finally breaks apart. Evidence suggested the attack began near the back porch, after Kong either slipped free from restraint or resisted entering the enclosure. Blood on the porch railing indicated Morrow initially tried forcing the animal back using the broom handle. The broken handle was later recovered near the steps. At some point, Kong lunged upward and grabbed Morrow's left forearm before biting deeply near the wrist. The pressure fractured both forearm bones almost immediately. Investigators believed Morrow tried retreating toward the cabin door after the initial bite. Drag marks in the snow showed where he lost footing and fell sideways off the porch. Kong remained attached to the arm while pulling him across the ground. Large sections of disturbed snow suggested the chimp repeatedly climbed onto his torso during the struggle. Medical findings later documented crushing injuries across the ribs consistent with stomping and pulling motions. The attack continued toward a line of trees 40 feet behind the house. Blood patterns showed Morrow remained conscious for at least part of that distance. Defensive wounds on both hands indicated he repeatedly tried shielding his face and throat. Tissue recovered near the tree line showed severe tearing injuries around the cheeks and neck. A nearby resident called 911 at 10:42 p.m. after hearing screaming during a break in the storm. Because of icy roads and the remote location, deputies arrived about 30 minutes later. Officers reported finding Kong still pacing near the wooded edge of the property, while Morrow lay motionless nearby. The county coroner later reported catastrophic blood loss, severe facial trauma, fractured ribs, crushed forearms, and extensive soft tissue injuries consistent with a prolonged captive primate attack. Morrow was pronounced dead at the scene. The case received little national attention outside regional reporting. Authorities classified it as a private exotic animal fatality involving an unlicensed chimpanzee. According to later reports, Kong was tranquilized overnight after remaining inside the enclosure area and was transferred under state supervision to a secure primate facility the following day. Silas's tragedy was hidden in the remote woods, but Marcus Vail used his chimpanzee as a tool for corporate intimidation. He believed his status as CEO gave him authority over his animal, until a jammed gate during a retreat showed him who was truly in charge. It was October 11th, 2013. Light rain had passed earlier that evening outside Asheville, North Carolina, leaving the gravel roads around a private estate damp and slick beneath vehicle headlights. Generator noise and music echoed across the wooded property, hosting a company retreat for senior employees. Marcus Vail was 48 and had built a fortune turning remote rural properties into luxury hunting lodges and private getaway estates across the Southeast. People who knew him described him as confident, social, and the kind of guy who always needed to impress whoever was standing in front of him. Most weekends at his mountain property followed the same pattern. Expensive drinks around the fire pit, loud conversations that dragged late into the night, and guests wandering past the exotic animal enclosures Marcus kept around the estate. Several years earlier, Marcus acquired an adult male chimpanzee named Chief through a loosely regulated exotic animal broker connected to former entertainment animal operations in Tennessee. According to his friends, Marcus always brings Chief and introduces him to visitors, and over time, Marcus felt more relaxed and found Chief's presence as part of his daily life. Adult male chimpanzees can weigh more than 130 pounds and possess far greater upper body strength than most men. In captivity, stressed chimps often show aggression through screaming, charging, baring teeth, and slamming barriers. Former handlers said Chief had become increasingly unstable with age and reacted badly to loud gatherings. Once an animal repeatedly shows those behaviors, people usually survive on routine rather than control. Two former handlers had already warned Marcus that Chief was becoming too unpredictable to keep around guests, especially once alcohol got involved. A groundskeeper had even been bitten during a feeding incident the year before. Another employee even recalled Chief reacting aggressively whenever large groups gathered near the enclosure, but Marcus dismissed it because, according to him, nothing catastrophic had happened yet. That night, guests gathered around the fire pit while drinks circulated across the patio. Some filmed videos as Marcus demonstrated hand signals with Chief inside the enclosure. Witnesses later said the mood changed after loud cheering near the fence startled the chimp. Chief immediately began pacing faster, slamming both hands against the fencing and yanking violently near the restraint barrier. And I think a lot of people there already sensed something was wrong. Marcus approached the enclosure anyway after part of the restraint mechanism appeared jammed. Witnesses later said he leaned close to the gate while trying to calm the animal himself. Investigators later found damage around one hinge and evidence the latch had not fully locked before the door shifted inward. Chief forced through the partially opened gate almost immediately. Witnesses described the chimp moving low and fast across the gravel before crashing into Marcus hard enough to knock him backward beside the patio chairs. Phones dropped while people scattered toward parked vehicles. The first injuries involved the face and hands. Witnesses said Marcus raised both arms toward his head, while Chief repeatedly bit and pulled at tissue around the jaw and mouth. Blood spread across the gravel as the chimp struck him between bites. One employee later admitted the sound stayed with him because Marcus stopped sounding human once the damage around the throat worsened. For me, this is the most terrifying scene anyone could witness. Marcus remained conscious during part of the attack. Witnesses saw him trying to roll away while the chief grabbed his left arm and twisted it backward before biting into the neck and scalp. Medical investigators later documented severe tearing injuries around the cheeks, throat, and fingers, along with fractures to both forearms, consistent with defensive wounds. One attendee tried intervening with a metal patio chair, but backed away after the chief charged toward him, screaming. Several guests later admitted firearms were stored elsewhere on the property, but Marcus had ordered them locked earlier in the evening because alcohol had been flowing for hours around the fire pit. The attack continued for several more minutes before a kitchen employee lured the chimp toward a nearby utility room. Another worker locked the door behind it. A human resources manager called 911 at approximately 9:41 p.m. Because of the rural location, paramedics arrived roughly 22 minutes later. Marcus lost pulse activity during transport to Mission Hospital. The coroner later documented catastrophic injuries involving the face, neck, chest, and arms, along with extreme blood loss and crushing trauma consistent with a prolonged chimpanzee attack. The company quietly ended its retreat program within months. Several employees later reached private settlements connected to workplace safety complaints and the use of exotic animals during corporate events. Chief was euthanized after the investigation. Marcus's pride led to a public execution on his own patio. But our next story moves to a wedding where a celebration of love ended before the first dance. Just like a loose gate, a split-second mechanical failure on a motorcycle turned a dream day into a desert nightmare. It was April 28, 2018, in Taos County, New Mexico. Warm winds pushed dust across the narrow rural roads outside town, while barking dogs echoed between scattered trailers and isolated homes. Behind one fenced property, children played near a wooden climbing area beside a chimpanzee enclosure only a few feet from the house. Elena Varro was 39 and had spent years working in alternative early childhood education programs across northern New Mexico. Former co-workers described her as patient and committed to non-traditional learning. After leaving a licensed preschool position, Elena began hosting a small informal homeschooling and nature learning group from her rural property, where a handful of local families rotated children through outdoor lessons, gardening activities, and supervised animal exposure. The chimpanzee, an adolescent male named Oliver, became central to the program. Elena regularly described him as emotionally aware and unusually gentle around children. Looking back, I think that belief erased the normal boundaries people should keep around a powerful wild animal. Chimpanzees are among the strongest primates on Earth. Adult males can overpower humans easily, and adolescence often makes captive chimps territorial and unpredictable. Wildlife experts later stated that keeping a maturing chimp around children without professional containment systems created constant danger. Warning signs had already appeared. One parent quietly stopped attending the learning group after Oliver shoved another child hard enough to split the child's lip against a table edge. Another family reported the chimp screaming and slamming fencing whenever Elena focused attention on her 6-year-old son, Milo. Honestly, this is the part people usually ignore. The disaster rarely starts suddenly. On the afternoon of April 28th, Elena hosted a small gathering. Witnesses later said Oliver appeared agitated from the beginning. He paced along the fencing, vocalized loudly, and struck the metal rails hard enough to shake them. Elena dismissed it as excitement caused by visitors. I think this is where familiarity becomes dangerous, because people stop seeing warning behavior as warning behavior once they've normalized it for long enough. Around 4:30 p.m., Milo fell near the gravel driveway and began crying. Elena carried him inside while Oliver remained outside in the connected enclosure. Investigators later determined that part of the sliding barrier between the enclosure and the kitchen entry had not fully latched. Witnesses heard a metallic impact moments after Elena entered the house, followed by crashing sounds and screaming. Oliver forced the door inward and rushed toward Elena before she could secure the entry. The chimp struck her across the shoulders and chest, knocking her backward into a cabinet hard enough to leave a dent that investigators photographed. Oliver then bit into her left forearm as she tried shielding Milo behind her body. Witnesses outside described hearing repeated impacts against cabinets while Elena screamed for Milo to run. Milo escaped barefoot through a side laundry door and ran to a neighboring property. The neighbor, Darian Holt, called 911, while Milo hid behind a parked truck covered in blood transferred from his mother's injuries. Inside the kitchen, the attack continued in bursts. Responders later found overturned chairs, broken tile, and tissue near the refrigerator. Evidence suggested Elena remained conscious during part of the attack. Defensive wounds covered both hands and forearms, while Oliver repeatedly bit around the head, neck, and upper back as she tried moving away. Deputies arrived about 18 minutes later, but paramedics initially stayed outside because the chimp was still loose inside the home. According to later reports, deputies eventually forced Oliver back toward the connected enclosure area and secured an interior barrier before animal control personnel entered. Elena was airlifted to a regional trauma center, but died during surgery from blood loss and cranial trauma. County officials later confirmed the learning group operated privately between families rather than as a licensed daycare. Several parents later admitted they ignored earlier warning signs because Elena always appeared calm and experienced around the animal. And for me, that's probably the hardest part of this case. People trusted confidence more than the behavior right in front of them.